Leviticus Chapter 13. The test for leprosy. Leprosy laws remind us of sin, how it spreads, how it isolates, and requires cleansing from God. But Jesus is our healer, and thank the Lord for that. And it says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, When a man has swelling on the skin of his body, a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes the infection of leprosy in the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron, the priest, or to one of his sons, the priest. The priest shall look at the diseased spot on the skin of his body. If the hair in the infection has turned white, and the infection appears deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him ceremonially unclean. If the bright spot is white on the skin of his body and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the person who has the infection for 7 days. The priest shall examine it on the 7th day, and if in his estimation the infection has not changed, has not spread on the skin, the priest shall isolate him for 7 more days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if the infection has a more normal color, and the spot has not spread on his skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads farther on the skin, after he has shown himself to the priest for his ceremonial cleansing, he shall show himself to the priest again. And the priest will look, and if the scab is spread, then he shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When a leprous infection is on a person, he shall be brought to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and if there is a white swelling on the skin, it has turned the hair white, and there is new raw flesh in the swelling. It is a chronic leprosy on the skin of his body. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. He shall not isolate him, because he is clearly unclean. But if the suspected leprosy breaks out farther on the skin and covers all of the skin of the one who has the outbreak from his head to his foot, wherever the priest looks, the priest shall examine him. And if his suspected leprosy has covered his entire body, he shall pronounce him clean of the disease. It is all turned white, and he is clean. But whatever raw flesh appears on him, he shall be unclean. The priest shall examine the raw flesh, and he shall pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is leprosy. But if the raw flesh turns again and is changed to white, he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall examine him. And if the diseased parts is changed to white, then the priest shall pronounce him who had the disease to be clean. He is clean. And when there is on the skin of the body the scar of a boil that is healed, and in the place of the boil there is this white swelling or a bright spot, reddish white, then it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall look, and if it looks deeper than the skin, and the hair on it turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a disease of leprosy. It is broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines him and finds no white hair, and is not deeper than the skin, is not dull in color, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. The isolation, right? See, let's just check. You're sick. Isolate yourself for a little bit and make sure you're not going to spread any disease around you, right? But if the priest examines it and finds no white hair on it, and is not deeper than the skin, and is dull in color, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads farther in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a disease. But if the bright spot remains where it is and does not spread, it is the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. Or clean. Or if the body has on its skin a burn from fire, and the new flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall examine it, and if the hair on the bright spot has turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, the leprosy is broken out in the burn. So the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a disease of leprosy. But if he examines it, and there is no white hair in the bright spot, and not deeper than the rest of the skin, but is dull in color, then the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it is spreading farther in the skin, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean, it is leprosy. But if this bright spot remains in its place and has not spread, it is dull in color, a swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a scar of the burn. When a man or woman has a disease on the head or in the beard, the face, the priest shall examine the diseased place. It appears to be deeper than the skin with yellow, thin hair in it. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scale. It is leprosy of the head or beard. But if the priest examines a spot infected by the scale and does not appear deep in the skin, and there is no black hair in it, the priest shall isolate the person with the scaly infection for 7 days. And on the 7th day, the priest shall examine the diseased spot. If the scale has not spread and has no yellow hair in it, and the scale does not look deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself, but he shall not shave the scale. And the priest shall isolate that person with the scale for 7 more days. Then on the 7th day, the priest shall look at the scale, and if it hasn't spread and appears to be deeper, the priest shall pronounce him clean, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if it spreads farther on the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him, and scales spread. The priest need not look for the yellowish hair. He is unclean. If the priest's estimation the scale has remained without spreading, and black hair has grown in, the scale is healed, and he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Interesting, like leprosy. I know leprosy still goes on today. It's actually, I remember reading that leprosy is spread here in Florida more through dead armadillos, which I thought was interesting. And so it's like one of those things where you think it's not really around too much anymore. But I know that in this area, not in this area specifically, but in the state of Florida, leprosy, you can contract leprosy from armadillos, which I thought was, a random weird fact. But it's like this was the disease back then. That's what there was. They don't talk too much about the other ones that we know about nowadays, everything that is, compounded in our society. But being specific, God knows the plans. God knows what to do to heal it. And that's the great, beautiful thing. It says, when a man or woman has bright spots in the skin of the body, even white bright spots, and the priest shall look, and if the bright spots in the skin of the body is dull white, it's only a rash, and is broken on the skin, he is clean. If a man loses the hair in his head, he is bald, but he is clean. And if he loses the hair in the front of his head, he is bald in the forehead, but he is clean. But if there's reddish white infection on the bald head or forehead, it's leprosy breaking out on his bald head or forehead. Then the priest shall examine him. If the disease swelling is reddish white on his bald head or forehead, like the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man. He is unclean, and the priest shall most certainly pronounce him unclean. His disease is on his head. As for the leper who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered. And he shall cover his mustache and call out, unclean, unclean. Interesting. Some of these things we're not going to understand, like why they would do these things. He shall remain ceremonially unclean as long as the disease is on him, and he is unclean. He shall live alone. He shall live outside the camp. When the garment has a mark of leprosy in it, whether it's a wool garment or a linen garment, whether it's woven or knitted material or in the warp, lengthwise strands or woof, the crosswise strands or of linen or in wool or in skin or in anything made of leather. If the mark is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather or in the warp of the woof or in any article made of leather, it shall be an infestation of leprosy, and it shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the mark and shall quarantine the article with the mark for 7 days. He shall examine the mark on the 7th day. It is spread in the garment, whether in the warp or the woof, or in the leather, whatever the leather's purpose. The mark is a malignant leprosy. It is unclean. So he shall burn the garment, whether in the wool or the linen, or in anything made of leather, in which the mark occurs. For it is malignant leprosy. It shall be burned in the fire. But if the priest sees that the mark has not spread in the garment, either in any of those things, then he shall order that they wash the thing in which the mark occurs, and it shall quarantine it for 7 more days. The priest shall examine the article, and if nothing's changed color, even though the mark has not spread, it is unclean. You shall burn it in the fire. It is a corroding mildew, whether on the top or on the front of it. If the priest looks and the mark has faded after its wash, he shall tear it out of the garment or the leather out of the warp or the woof. If it still appears in the garment, either in the warp or the woof or in anything made of leather, it is an outbreak. You shall burn the marked part in the fire. The garment, whether the warp or the woof or anything made of leather, from which the mildew has departed after washing, shall then be washed a second time. It will be ceremonially clean. This is a law for a leprous disease in a garment of wool or linen, either in the warp or woof or in anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or unclean. You will know all there is to know about having leprosy. And let's see the facts behind it. It's not a prevalent thing, I think. And maybe depending where you're at, I don't know. I guess we'd have to look that up. So interesting, even though.